Hi, thanks for being here. The name of this presentation is Competency-Based Teaching, an Alternative to Traditional Grading. My name is Marlene Graf. I used to have brown hair. That's changed. But I teach in the Department of Nutrition, Dietetics, and Food Sciences at Utah State University on the Logan campus. And when I saw the theme for this year's conference about Beyond the Grade, I had just listened to a podcast about competency-based teaching. And it talked about how this style of grading can often help motivate students beyond grades. It can help them learn to be learners and actually embrace the learning process. And so I felt like this was a good opportunity to explore that more. And so that's why I submitted a proposal. Here's an outline of what I'd like to talk about. First, we'll review what traditional grading is and what some pros and cons are. Then we'll talk about how competency-based teaching is different and pros and cons of that system. Number 3, we'll talk about ways to implement competency-based instruction, even if it's just partial implementation or elements, and how that works at an institution like USU where traditional letter grades are the norm. And then we'll talk about some recommended resources. So first, here's some definitions of traditional grading versus competency-based grading. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read through each paragraph, but this infographic highlights some differences between the two. Traditional grading is based on letter grades and percentages. It leans on assessments like quizzes, homework, and essays, and then does an average score of all of those things. It also includes stuff like extra credit and zeros and group scores. Standards-based grading or competency-based grading, those two terms are used interchangeably, doesn't include things like extra credit or scores of 0 or group scores, and it's also based on the most recent evidence of learning because it's focused on mastery and demonstrating mastery no matter how long it takes. So students often get lots of attempts to show improvement or growth and demonstrate a certain level of achievement. Traditional grading is one that consists of letter grades and percentages, and standards-based grading has different levels of mastery. This is just one example. It's not universal. But in this example, a scale of 4 means advanced mastery. A scale of 2 is basic mastery. So with traditional grading, compared to competency-based instruction, there are some benefits. Number 1, it tends to be our common language in higher education. And so it's the most commonly used system for measuring academic achievement. Especially in the United States, but it's also recognized globally. It provides a way to quickly and efficiently do college admissions, where you can assess a large number of applicants using kind of the same framework. Also, it can help certain students identify areas of strengths and weakness, and it's relatively simple and efficient and very familiar. And so it's easier to implement and administer rather than competency-based instruction, which is not as popular at this point. So some drawbacks. Compared to competency-based learning, traditional grading is more likely to emphasize performance over the learning process. It can undermine a student's intrinsic motivation. It may discourage risk-taking and growth. It can stifle creativity and critical thinking skills. When teachers give feedback, sometimes that feedback quality is poor or diluted. And many critics say that it negatively impacts a student's mental health and well-being because of the amount of stress and pressure that it sometimes causes. So Josh Eiler is an author. He's also based at the University of Mississippi. He has been critical of traditional grading and says this: in situations where grades are given, students tend to be more fearful of making mistakes, and mistakes are part of the learning process. Students produce more behaviors of trying to get the grade rather than actually learning. So I'm a registered dietitian. In my world of health and nutrition, I compare traditional grading to the body mass index assessment. So BMI is a assessment tool or score that shows the ratio of a person's height to body mass. It can be appropriate and useful in certain situations, but it's also fraught, and there are several problems. It's not always an accurate or helpful indicator of a person's health or chronic disease risk. And so, like traditional grading, there are some problems that are kind of baked in. With competency-based learning, the benefits compared to traditional grading are that it offers a more personalized approach to learning. It can be kind of custom made to fit a student's learning style, and often students learn at a deeper level than they would otherwise. It provides a lot of flexibility because this system is usually self-paced, and so that often appeals to adult learners, especially those who are balancing employment and other responsibilities. Competency-based education tends to emphasize real-world application and the development of skills and competencies, which makes it more relevant for future careers. It helps students feel more confident and prepared and more likely to engage. Also, many people consider competency-based learning to be more inclusive and equitable. There are, however, some drawbacks. In some cases, it may encourage procrastination or cause confusion for certain students. It can vary widely in terms of quality and credibility once it's implemented. It may not be suitable for all subject areas or learners, and it can require a significant amount of time to organize and prepare and implement, especially on the front end. Also, you lose some things in terms of social interaction and collaborative learning when you switch to a competency-based model and away from a more traditional teaching system. And so that's something to consider. So when I think of competency-based grading, I compare it to something like swimming lessons. You don't get a letter grade for swimming lessons, or it's not just a set of average scores. Instead, there are skills that you need to master before you can advance to the next level of skills. And so that is kind of how competency-based learning or mastery learning is built. So here are some ways to implement this. Keep in mind that you don't have to change to a 100% competency-based course all at once. In my case, I have incorporated some elements of competency-based teaching, but I'm still kind of standing on the diving board, so to speak. I haven't actually fully jumped in and explored it on a deep level or done 100% competency-based in any of the courses I teach. But here are 4 ideas to consider. And all of these tools can be found in Canvas. So one is the Canvas Outcomes tool, where you identify certain learning objectives or outcomes that students need to reach and hopefully master, and then you can create rubrics and assign those to certain assignments or assessments and assess how well students are mastering those outcomes. A second tool is to use modules, where you chunk information or projects or skills, and students need to complete certain modules before they can advance to subsequent modules. So with modules, you can create prerequisites where there are certain things that they need to complete before they start a particular module. So in this case, a student can't start exam 3 until they have first completed the modules for chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12. You can also define the criteria for each module and determine when a student has actually reached a level of mastery or when they're considered done with that module. This page shows how to view the progress of individual students on modules, and so this link goes to the Instructure page that explains how to do that. I also like to use Delphinium because it provides a nice visual for students on how they're doing, like what modules they've completed, what ones they've started, what ones they still have left to do, and kind of where they're at in terms of their performance. Idea number 3 is to implement a Canvas mastery pathway tool where a student's score on an initial assignment determines whether or not they move on to the next level assignment or if they do some more remedial work before they're allowed to advance. This mastery gradebook also has rubrics where you can set different levels of mastery, and then these colors show different levels in the gradebook, and you can enable this for students and teachers. To do that, you go to the settings feature on Canvas, and then you click on feature options, and you can enable learning mastery gradebook for teachers and the student learning mastery gradebook that students can view. So here are some resources. My favorite resource still for competency-based learning is an ETE presentation by Carrie Lamoureux back in 2021. I think it's my favorite because it's the first time I was introduced to this concept. She also does a great job of going through the nuts and bolts of setting up modules. Here's some additional resources that I either referenced during this presentation or that have been helpful to me as I've explored competency-based teaching more, and I would encourage you to check those out. If you'd like a copy of this PowerPoint, I'm happy to send it to you. Just send me an email. I'll end with this quote: "If higher education wants to stay relevant for this generation of students, faculty members must learn to tweak courses, redesign learning environments, and reevaluate their approaches to measuring and assessing learning." In other words, we can't stay stagnant. We need to continue to be learners ourselves and make improvements. So thank you. I hope that this was helpful in some way.